In this first generation, the original male also produced a queen, and together they will construct a primary nest which the queen will guard. But eventually, she will create reproductive offspring of her own. And when that happens, this town is dead, and the next town, and the next town, and the next one, and so on. This is a No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt,
And I'm Mel.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is the 16th episode of season 7, and we are discussing arachnophobia as part of our series on killer animals. So, welcome to this latest episode. As I said in the intro, we're going to be discussing the movie Arachnophobia. It's a 1990 movie. For those of you, if you haven't seen it, I think this one may be a little bit more off the radar from some of the other ones we've discussed for this series. But like I said, it came out in 1990. It was a horror comedy written by Don Jacoby, Al Williams, and Wesley Strick, directed by Frank Marshall, and produced by Steven Spielberg and Frank Marshall. I think Steven Spielberg's name as one of the producers probably helped get this some of its notoriety at the time. I won't say notoriety. It wasn't a huge blockbuster in its day either. But anyway, it's starring Jeff Daniels and Julian Sands, Harley Jane Kozak, and has a small but very memorable appearance by John Goodman. And yeah, so Arachnophobia. It's an interesting movie. I'm sure Mel and I will have lots to discuss on the overall discussion of this film, but it's it's definitely a film that feels a little bit of its time. Just kind of the tempo and the pace of the movie and some of the set pieces and everything else feels very much a early 90s sort of movie. And I think I can maybe explain that a little bit more detailed as we kind of get into the deeper discussion. But when we do these sorts of discussions, we always like to start off with kind of our original like thoughts and impressions and even our history with this movie. So I just watched this again last night, the night before we started recording, and I had actually watched this fairly recently. I want to say within the last year or so. We watched it as a family. I don't remember the reason why, but we had, I think it was streamed for free at the time on one of the streaming services, and we watched it. But I've seen it prior to us deciding to do it for this episode within the last year or so. And I actually did see it way back when it first came out. Did not see it in the movie theater. I was a little bit young for that, but I remember when it came out on video, I begged my parents to let me watch it. They rented it. I made it up through kind of the first scene and then got scared and had to turn it off. And then I want to say it was maybe like a month or so later, I worked up the nerve to do it, like to watch it and ask them to rent it again, and we did, and I watched the whole movie at that point. But for those of you that have seen the movie, it was the scene where, still in the Amazon jungle, where the photographer gets bitten by the spider and dies in his cot. The 8 or 9 or 10-year-old me, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how old I was. It was probably about 9 based on the year the movie came out. But 9-year-old me was just absolutely terrified and couldn't continue the movie. But having watched it as an adult, it's far less scary. I, in fact, have quite a bit of note taking that I took just in terms of, oh my goodness, I can't believe they did this, or things like that, because watching it now, some 30 odd years later, I mean, it's, I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad movie. It's not. It's actually pretty fun. But I mean, it's a horror comedy from 1990 about killer spiders. So I mean, it's not going to be real serious fare, I guess is what I'm getting with, or going towards it. And honestly, I absolutely love John Goodman's role in this movie. He has a fairly small role compared to the other principal cast, but he is a local exterminator, and I think he was just having so much fun just chewing the scenery. It felt like. But I'm going to stop now and kind of turn it over to Mel. Let her um, just kind of give her initial thoughts before we dive in for something a little bit deeper here.
Yeah, Matt, some of my thoughts are very similar to yours, actually. And before I get started, I just want to say, listeners, you've probably noticed by now, of course, that Lisa is not with us. She wasn't able to join us tonight. She's fine, and she'll be back in the future. But we ended up not being able to have her join us tonight. So my impressions, I agree with you that the John Goodman exterminator character was very funny. Um, I also have kind of a background or a past, I guess you would say, with this movie. So I don't know that I have arachnophobia per se, but I am not a fan of spiders. I find them very creepy, and I think we actually had this discussion when we talked about the movie Something Wicked This Way Comes many years ago on this podcast when Lisa and I were discussing the horrors of the scene where the spiders are swarming around on the ceiling. That those sorts of things definitely disturb me, especially if spiders are like crawling on people or going like around people's eyes or in their ears or their nose or various other things. That is not something that I find that very kind of disturbing, I guess. Would be a way to describe it. And so when I was a kid and I watched this, which I feel like this was a rental type thing where like we were toward the end of a I feel like it was at school and it was basically like a gimme day where they were like, here, watch this movie and shove the tape in and we watched it. So I was probably around the same age as you, Matt, maybe a year older. And when I was a kid, I was even more afraid of spiders than I am now. So I had known just like my awareness of the movie being out there. It was not a movie where I was like, I want to go see this in the theaters. And I'm assuming we watched most of it. I don't know if we would have been able to make it all the way through the movie in one class period, but I'm assuming we finished it eventually. Of course, sometimes, they'll just throw something in to entertain you and keep you quiet, but then they don't show you the end. So I seriously don't remember. But what I do remember is that I was scared and kind of disturbed by it. So with the spiders crawling all over the bathroom or on people's faces, the biting of the man. I remembered that when I was watching it now, of the biting the man in the cot. Those sorts of things scared me when I was younger. And I actually really had, I mean, nobody had ever suggested to me I watch Arachnophobia again. I never thought I want to watch that movie again. If I thought about it at all, I just thought about it as a movie that really creeped me out when I watched it as a kid and different scenes I could remember. Now, I have watched other spider movies. So I have seen the 1977 William Shatner Kingdom of the Spiders, which I feel like there are a few similar vibes between these two movies. I don't know how you could make a spider movie and not gesture around maybe at other movies. I've watched the terrible kind of almost sci-fi channel movie, I guess you would say, Lavalantula. I've watched Kiss of the Tarantulas, which I've mentioned on when Lisa and I were discussing animals attacking in our intro episode to this theme. So I have seen other spider movies, and so when coming back to Arachnophobia was like, my child self inside was kind of like, ooh, this is creepy. I don't know if I kind of want to do this. But as an adult and having seen these other movies, I wanted to do it. Like I wanted to watch this. And as an adult, I was entertained. I think I said in both Lake Placid and Anaconda that the organization of the movies kind of confused me and there wasn't a clock on things. I felt like I just went with this movie and was just being entertained by it. And I was never I don't think I was ever kind of questioning the clock or anything like that. I do realize there are holes in it and it's a 1990 horror comedy. So I think we'll probably have a lot to question about it, Matt, and to talk about how it may have been a product of its time. But I feel like, I enjoyed Anaconda and Lake Placid, but I feel like this movie was more of just like I'm just watching this movie and enjoying it, and not necessarily I'm watching it to talk about it and take notes on it. I was still creeped out about the spiders on people's faces and things like that, but I was able to handle it. One other thing I guess there's a couple things I just want to throw out there that we may talk about or we may not, Matt, depending upon your thoughts on them. But I liked the kind of Amblin Studio Steven Spielberg feel to this, I guess. There were little moments I can't even fully articulate where I just kind of knew I was in that kind of movie. And I feel like it took the edge off the horror. I know we shared an article with 18 facts about this movie from Mental Floss, and they talked about how the movie was originally supposed to be much scarier, and they put the comedy in to kind of give little rest breaks, I guess you would say, or pauses. And another thing that I thought was interesting along this line was the small town insider outsider theme that was happening. That in itself kind of added to the horror. It wasn't just a creature feature; it was a moving from a big city to a small town and trying to figure out where you fit in kind of thing. So yeah, I liked those aspects of it. I liked the kind of insertion of the comedy. I liked the small town theme vibe. And then I feel like this movie has good creature feature vibes to it. It definitely has a nature doing things that we can kind of explain, but is terrifying, like The Birds by Hitchcock, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast. So, Matt, those are some of the themes, I guess, that I noticed, or some of my impressions. I think it's fun that we were both kind of scared of this movie as kids, and now we're coming back to talk about it again. I definitely did not see this coming when I was a kid, that I was going to watch it again and enjoy having a discussion about it.
I like what you said about the Steven Spielberg Amblin Entertainment feel to it, because yes, that is, well, like you said, it's hard to articulate and it's hard to put a finger on it, but there's a vibe to it. Like I don't know how else to say that. It's it's got a little bit of the same sort of cinematic feel as a movie like E.T. Or some of the other 80s Amblin Entertainment movies. It's I guess it has to do with style, maybe the way shots are set up and framed, and that kind of thing, and the cinematography. I maybe I'm just not well versed enough to in like cinema styles and the actual cinematography to articulate this more fully, but I fully agree. Like there's a very specific sort of tone, I guess that's the word I'm looking for, tone, to the movie. And I think you're right. It does help take the edge off, because I mean, I know I mentioned being 9 years old and scared by the first scene of the movie, but I mean, I don't have. I think I'm kind of like you in the sense that I don't have full on arachnophobia. I just don't like spiders. I've seen many spiders in my day. I saw one earlier today in the house, and like, they don't paralyze me with fear or anything like that, but I really don't like them either. And they, I don't know if it's that creepy crawliness of it, or what, but not a big fan of spiders. So watching a movie all about spiders, it was nice to have those sorts of beats where it there was some comedy played up, and there was some kind of like rest from the scare factors of it. And yeah, and I think the two what you said about the small town, big city, insider outsider vibe, I thought that was kind of an interesting uh, like take in the movie to add that, because it did make the characters a little bit more interesting. They weren't just fully one-dimensional characters, just there for the characters to eat, and to have a hero and his family survive. I mean, they actually felt a little more fleshed out. I still think that maybe the characters themselves overall weren't the most dynamic, but having that plot line did kind of make them a bit more interesting. Jeff Daniels in particular, uh, I almost wish maybe that they had just had like one or two lines of dialogue towards the beginning, to maybe explain it a little bit better, because he keeps making references to having his wine cellar in this new country house that he and his wife have moved to. And I mean, like, they don't do a real good job of establishing why that's so important to him. Obviously, he's a wine collector and he likes wine, and it does come up in the final scene of the movie, but it's not it's not fully fleshed out, I guess. I mean, it just felt like there needed to be a little bit more. But having him as this outsider did lead to some interesting things, especially since I mean, he's this big city doctor who's moved to this small town. Apparently, his wife has quit her job, and he's moved with this promise of being able to take over this small town practice. Of course, they move, and then the old doctor, who is both old, like physically, and old as in the original, um, decides that he's not actually going to retire. And it does kind of set up some of these kind of fun dynamics between him and Jeff Daniels, as well as like the local sheriff and Jeff Daniels, who is the sheriff is a bit of I guess legalistic, you might say. Like he's intent in their first meeting on writing him a expired parking meter ticket, even though Jeff Daniels is just leaving, and has medical license plates and all these sorts of things. But anyway, I'm sort of losing the thread of my point there. But do you want to kind of start from the beginning and just kind of work through the movie, maybe, and just talk about the stuff we noticed, and other stuff, or did you have any other themes that you wanted to kind of flesh out?
No, I mean we can kind of start at the beginning and work our way through. I think your description of like we have our main characters who are just fish out of water, like you were saying, like they're city people. I agree with you. I wanted the wine thing, while it leads to kind of important points in the plot later on and comic effect, was not probably explained as much as it could have. We don't have I'm looking through my notes, and we really don't have a really developed definite what's the word I'm looking for? Really developed explanation of why they left San Francisco and came here, because he doesn't seem to necessarily be looking for quietness and a good place for the kids, though I think maybe that's what she's looking for. And so I think you're right. They're kind of glossing over some of those things because they want to get us into the spider horror of it. Um, which is funny to me that we're talking so much about the small town conflicts. I agree with you. They're kind of types, but I cared about these characters more than I've cared about characters in the last two movies we talked about. Like, I did not want the first woman he examined to die so quickly because I thought she was a really fascinating character. But another interesting thing, kind of spoking off from that you were talking about, is we meet the spiders first in a way because we have this you always have to have a professor. The movie is odd when you talk about it because it's a small town, city people coming to the country and having some conflict, but it's set within the idea that these spiders have to get there from Venezuela. So we start out with this almost like Indiana Jones like professor diving into this ravine in Venezuela to look for new bugs and animals, and I believe he's actually looking for insects, and he finds these spiders which kill a photographer. That's the scene that creeped both of us out as kids. And then like invasive species do, the spider gets in the coffin with the guy and comes to this small town. So that's the connection between Venezuela and this small town in California that we're in. And that's the reason why Julian Sands's, which listeners, we also know that Julian Sands has been missing in that possible hiking accident this year. So his name has been in the news in 2023. That's what gives the impetus for his character to eventually go to the small town. So I think in other people's hands, the connections between Venezuela and this small town might have not connected as well as it does. Like, I didn't think it was bumpy as a watcher that we start out in this adventure story looking for spiders, and then the spiders end up in this small town Amblin entertainment. Gets caught by a bird, bites the bird, falls out of the sky, like all that, takes over the barn, all this kind of stuff. So I don't. Yeah, as I was watching the movie, I was like, this is a kind of a tonal and geographical shift, but it needs to happen because the horror is not just that spiders are creepy. The horror is what if a spider is discovered that's super venomous and then manages to cross borders, because that's the you're not safe. I what is it? The professor says it's like there's 60,000 spiders in every acre or something. Like spiders are around us all the time. And I read an article a couple months ago about about if you knew how many spiders were around you just while you were sitting in your house, you'd be so surprised. So it's this ubiquitous thing that's all around us. Like you saw one in your house this morning, Matt. But if there's, if it gets to a point where we can't quite handle it, or something new, and then it mates, and then something else changes, like it's fiction, but there's a lot of potential for fear there. And I thought that was interesting, like marrying the South American professor plot with that small town plot that you were describing, which could seem disruptive, but actually kind of worked for me.
Well, and I did notice in rewatching this that that opening segment, I like the fact that they did have this kind of introductory bit where how the spider got to America kind of thing, and like it's one of those things where it all ties together in the third act of the movie, because you don't really see Julian Sand's character again after the first part, until the third act, when Jeff Daniels has finally started to figure out that it's spider bites that are killing people. But I liked that, to be honest. It's sort of, I guess, gave it a little bit more of a realism to it, I guess, because I mean, yes, there are plenty of undiscovered spiders in unexplored or rarely explored parts of the world, the hard to access places, and so it makes sense that that this could happen. Now, how it actually happens in the plot of the movie is a little far fetched, just in that they make a point of saying that the spider is unusually aggressive, and they also make another point too about how the spiders themselves are drones, except for one queen, so that they don't have any sex organs, which is a major point for how they're able to end this movie after establishing the fact that the spiders are everywhere in this small town. But I mean, it does kind of jump the shark a little bit, because the spider, like the actual queen, not only bites the photographer, whose name I'm drawing a complete blank on at the moment, while he's sleeping in his cot. It then crawls into his coffin for when he's shipped back to America. And I mean, it's one of those, like, so unbelievable kind of set of circumstances that you kind of have to suspend disbelief a little bit. But I liked the fact that they were trying, that they were giving a reason for how this super venomous, super uh, aggressive spider, where it came from, how it got to this small town America, and all of that. So, and the fact that this is, a horror comedy, I'm not going to hold it to like super high standards of realism for sure, but I am definitely going to have to point out some of the things that are a little not realistic, I guess. But I mean, I felt like having that opening was a nice setting of the stage, and it does lead into the great scene in the mortuary once his character has returned to the States, when they open the box, or the coffin, and I mean, he's been just completely desiccated, as they say, and uh, the mortician is like, even he's a little like unnerved by it, even though he basically goes back to eating his sandwich, if I remember right.
Yeah, the cat and the dog are way scared of the spider. They run away, but nobody else seems to notice what's going on.
Smartly they run away. Well, I mean, I guess we should maybe dive into dive into the kind of the next act of the movie, because I guess the first act kind of is the setting the stage with how the spider gets to America. Um, Exit stage left for Julian Sand's character. He'll return in Act Three, and so we meet Jeff Daniels and his wife and his family, and I will literally probably have to just refer to them as his wife and his family because I mean that's basically all they are. Like, I think we get their names, but they're just kind of there. He's the hero of the movie, and they're kind of almost set pieces, and not really anyone that. I mean, aside from his wife, I mean, we see more of her, but like the kids, they're just smiling, happy kids that we don't want to die. So, um, but yeah, to jump back to what you had mentioned about his first patient, um, she is. I agree too that I wish that she had lived a bit longer. She's kind of a firecracker. She's an older woman, but not completely elderly. I think they said that she's a like late 60s, like 67, 68, if I remember right. And I mean, she's just a real like outgoing pistol of a woman, I guess, who basically rescues him from the sheriff who's trying to write the ticket for him or to him for him. I don't know, write him a ticket for an expired parking meter. And basically, I mean, she says that she does not like the old doctor and wants to like is ready to see Jeff Daniels' character just as soon as he like opens his doors, basically. Um, but yeah, her character does die pretty quickly. In fact, a lot of the like B list cast or second tier cast, they're really a lot. Everyone's killed off pretty quickly. It kind of it's kind of surprising to me how quickly a lot of these characters died.
Me too. And I don't know about you. Were you surprised that they killed the kid? I was surprised the second victim was like a 15 or 16-year-old football player.
I was surprised by that, and I guess I mean it led to the great fear of it. You know, the spider was inside his football helmet that he put on at practice. So then he gets bitten while they're practicing, and then of course it crawls out before anyone can see that it was a spider. But yeah, I was kind of surprised that they killed um, a high school age kid as well. Um, I will say that that scene that is one thing that has lived on with me, aside from the sheer terror of 9-year-old me from the opening scene. But yeah, I definitely, if I'm going to put on like a full face mask or a helmet or anything like that, I still to this day, like 30 plus years later, will check inside for spiders, and I'm pretty sure that goes back to this movie. Like I'm not 100%, but I'd say about 90% sure that that's where that comes from is watching this happen.
Well, and I think that's one of the good ways that they deal with this because people do, like we talked earlier, have a fear of spiders. It may not be full-fledged arachnophobia, but there is a creepiness to them, unfortunately. I know that spiders are necessary in the world and don't mean to be evil, but and in fact, the spiders who acted in this movie were not aggressive because that was, a fictional thing, kind of like Jaws being made out to be more evil than sharks actually are. But the ways that these spiders were knocking off people were very realistic ways. Like, I mean, I don't know if arachnophobia makes me do this. I think it's just because there's so many stories about people getting bit by spiders who are under shoes. Every time I change my shoes or put on shoes or check my slippers or something, I take a look or kind of knock the shoe on the ground a couple times just to be sure that there's nothing in there. And yeah, I mean, we have the older woman that we both love, who speaks her mind. And she's like his champion as a good doctor. And then she dies, which makes everybody call him Dr. Death, because again, you're in a small town. So if everybody the doctor has examined starts dying, they're going to be like, oh, we're not sure about this. And that leads to some humor because when the older doctor dies, Jeff Daniels' wife is like, "Oh, thank God you didn't examine him this morning," because it's like the first person he didn't examine before they died. But The spiders, first the spider kind of goes for her cat and she rescues it, that suspense you have to have. And then the spider ends up in her lampshade, which I'm sure, I have gone to turn on a lamp and had a spider or some sort of insect inside the lampshade. That's just something you experience. And the doctor puts his feet in his slippers, the helmet, like you said, like a hat or something like that. So these are, yeah, the scene later when the spider, because they're aggressive, leaps to try to kill the graduate student and fails. The jumping aspects of the spiders when they weren't necessarily being threatened, yeah, we're kind of like, oh, this is a movie, obviously. But some of the deaths I thought they weren't realistic per se. We know we're watching Arachnophobia, but they were just realistic enough in the slippers and the hats and the lamps and all these sorts of things. It reminded me of, I think it's in Kingdom of the Spiders, a scene where the guy's driving and the spiders are on him and he just crashes. I mean, these are stories that we talk about, like, oh, if there was a spider on me while I was driving, I would just kind of lose control or something. And so I think that's part of the creepiness and the scariness of this, even though it is a comedy. These are way, and notice I'm not talking about the people with the popcorn because that was disturbing. It's completely disturbing how they die, that couple. Um, but yeah, it's not the aggressive spiders leaping out and killing people. It's people just, there's spiders in bed with them, the spiders in the shoe, the spiders, like this how like close we live to these things. And I thought that was effective. The end is kind of over the top, but it has to be because it's the end. And again, like you were saying earlier, spiders doing things they don't normally do. We have a spider screaming at the end, like the anaconda. I don't think spiders, like snakes, scream. Spiders do hiss, but I don't think they scream. So yeah, I think they had to up the ante as the movie went on to make it more and more scary. But some of those deaths I thought were just like realistic enough that they, like you said, get in our heads, where even years later we think about, do I really want to stick my hand inside this lamp without looking? Do I really want to do this? And I thought that was effective.
Absolutely. And I also check my shoes for spiders. I don't check them every time I put them on, but if it's a pair of shoes I haven't worn in a while, I'll definitely check and make sure that something hasn't gotten up in there and decided to make it a home for a bit, spider or not. We sometimes get ants in the summer and other little biting insects. So it's not just spiders. At least that's what I tell myself. But I
I
agree.
had a grasshopper in my shoe once when I put it on, and I will never not check my shoes again.
I mean, even something non-threatening like a grasshopper isn't probably enough to make you do it for life. I'm sure I would be doing the same thing because I'm sure when you put your foot in there, you didn't know it was a grasshopper. It wasn't
No,
till
no, no, no.
afterwards. But I agree. I think that's one place where this movie does succeed is in how mundane a lot of the deaths are. I mean, you've already mentioned pretty much all of them, but I mean the lampshade, the slippers. Um, there was the one that attacked the girl that was in the shower, and uh, simultaneously there was another one that had crawled into the toilet that her father was going to be using, separate bathrooms though, not in the same bathroom, that he gets spared from getting bitten because of the spider in the shower. But I mean, these are all normal places where you would see spiders. I mean, showers, toilets, bathrooms, slippers, I mean, all these sorts of places. And um, actually, even going back to the football helmet, I remember when I was younger, my dad actually had remarried, and um, his wife has two kids that were younger than me, and one of them uh, had a football helmet that they kept in the garage, and they went to go move it and found a black widow in it. So, I mean, that's a legitimately the same sort of thing that happened in Arachnophobia. I just just now remembered that. I'd forgotten it when we were talking about it earlier, but I think they do a good job of the mundane deaths. Really, that these are all normal ways. Now, To counterpose that, I will say that some of the other choices that they make, like you kind of already alluded to, they give these spiders a bit more menace than I think they should have. For instance, one of my notes while watching this, and this is from earlier when we first see the spider from South America actually mating with the house spider in the barn or whatever. We see my exact notes were ominous, pulsating egg sac because that's exactly like an egg sac and it's actually like pulsing like almost with a heartbeat and I'm like that's a little over the top there. But if you are going for a horror comedy, you do want to go a little over the top. So I'm not dinging them, but watching it, you go, "Oh, well, that's not realistic at all." And actually, I did want to jump back to probably one of my favorite moments in the movie was was right around that point. It's the first night, Jeff Daniels and his wife's first night in the new house, and he like gets a bottle of wine and is trying to seduce her, and she's like, well, I don't know, I'm really tired, and he gives her some line about making love the first night in the house or whatever, and then cut to like everything fades to black because this is a PG-13 movie, but then we do also see a parallel of the two spiders in the barn also beginning like their mating dance. And I thought that was hilarious. I did not catch that until this watch through, and I thought that was great. Like just a
Yeah, I
little
laughed at that.
subtle,
Yeah.
just a little subtle bit that it's like, wow, I never caught that in the past. That was great.
Yeah, the spiders are like creating their own new home while the humans are.
Exactly. Um, well, I guess to kind of keep moving through the movie, we've kind of reached about the third act where Jeff Daniels has really started to piece together. Like he's always been the one who's been suspicious, saying, his first patient, who's why am I drawing a blank on the character's name right now? But
Margaret.
like Margaret, thank you. Yes, yeah, he found her death to be suspicious because she was in really good health, and in fact, he had taken her off of blood pressure pills because he said that they were probably doing more harm than good, and she wasn't like that old, was in good shape, and her death was pretty sudden. So um, he was concerned by it, and of course gets overruled by the old doctor, especially the idea of doing an autopsy was something that he really protests against because I mean, and I think to be fair to the old doctor, he does have a point that autopsies can be invasive and can be a sort of scarring thing for a community, and I get where he was coming from with that, so I don't wholly fault him, even if he was kind of a jackass about it to Jeff Daniels, especially with the calling him Doctor Death and all that. I don't think he was the one that initiated that nickname, um, but anyway, Jeff Daniels has begun to sort of suspect that something else is going on, and he finally hits pay dirt when the doctor himself dies, and he does see the spider bite. I think it was between his toes, and just so happens to end up calling Julian Sand's office. And in true Indiana Jones as a professor fashion, he sends one of his grad students and doesn't go himself, which I thought was great. That he sends this grad student who doesn't even really know for sure if what he's looking at is a spider bite. He's almost as fish out of water as Jeff Daniels is in some way, but it does really start to kind of push the action towards the climax. So I liked that character. I don't know about you, but I did like the grad student. I kind of wanted to almost see more of him because I mean, he seemed like he seemed like a good guy and just kind of interesting, you know.
Yeah, he was a good graduate student. He went where his professor sent him. He talked about his specialization. He admitted when it was out of his depth, but he seemed like a good guy. He truly was trying to help. And at first, I thought it was interesting that even though he didn't really believe them at first, he still tried to help and hung around, and then helped them get the professor's attention too.
Exactly, exactly. And this is also the point in the movie where we get our first introduction to Delbert, as played by John Goodman. He gets called in by, I believe it was the football coach. Uh, he's the one that calls Delbert because it was his daughter was the one that was attacked by the spider in the shower, and so we get to see uh, Delbert, who, I mean, it's John Goodman playing an exterminator named Delbert in small town America, and he's just having so much fun with this. I think my favorite line is when he, in his first appearance, it may not have been his first appearance in the movie, but it's when he's talking with Jeff Daniels' wife, I believe it is, and she says that they collect wine, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I collect beer cans with misprints on the labels." Like it's such a weird line, but it makes me like laugh every time I hear it.
Yeah, he had some great lines. Or what was it? He said to her something like, "Would anyone object if I tore out this floor?" And she was like, "I would." And then he's like, "Oh, forget I said anything. No, no need." And then later, when he realized that his poison wasn't killing the spiders, he was like, "I'm gonna have to go to my private stock." Which he, in fact, like working with the professor, those two experts, which I thought was interesting, like marrying the small town expert with the professor. They were the ones who had knowing the behavior of spiders and having the, which I know it's kind of uncomfortable just to spray poison on spiders, but knowing how to exterminate them, like ended up working together, the scholarly side and the extermination side. And then of course Jeff Daniels ends up, in that kind of climactic end because he gets separated in the house from everybody else who has that knowledge, which is a good way to end a horror movie, really.
Well, of course, I mean, the protagonist separated, facing off against the primary antagonist. Yeah, it's a classic way to end a horror movie, and I mean we might as well just go ahead and kind of jump towards that. I did notice that it was funny because I wrote this note down, and this is just as they're like they've identified what kind of spider it is, and they're looking for kind of where the home base is, and they realize that it's at Jeff Daniels' house. And when they go to the house, and his wife and kids are watching TV, and he's like, "We got to get out. We got to get out." And then all of a sudden, the spiders are just come out of nowhere, like literally, like coming out of the drains and everywhere. And my note says, "Suddenly, the spiders are everywhere." And then immediately after that, the grad student says, "This doesn't make sense. They're swarming." So I have to give them credit. They did actually try to explain the complete change in behavior. It made no sense, but at least they really did give it the good old college try to explain why suddenly these spiders are now like descending on Jeff Daniels' house. What were your thoughts on that whole scene before we get to the big finale?
Oh, when he goes in to try to rescue the family. Yeah, I felt like if you're looking at it from a horror perspective, you've got to separate out your people. So you have the protagonist with the grad student going to save the family in the family home. And this is a home that they've already felt uncomfortable in since they're new and they have the issue with the rotted wood and, homeowner problems basically. And this is like a homeowner problem like you never seen before, right? Like a complete infestation, which I don't even want to think about it. And then you have the professor going to the main nest in the barn where he meets, I guess it's the general spider. I'm not sure. It was unclear as to where like the queen was and the general. I guess they were moving around. and the exterminator is trying to take care of what's going on in the outside of the house. So, like we said earlier, it's an isolation. They're trying to save the children and the family. And I thought it was interesting because they normally you would say just go out of the house, but they had to continue into the house and go upstairs because the spiders chose that moment to swarm, as you said, they explained. And so again, we have a trope of you're trying to get away from the monster and you go further into the house and you have you make it harder for yourself to escape. But they show them being cut off by the swarming. So I'm not sure why they were swarming, but it definitely explained a lot of stuff. And that was the way that Jeff Daniels' character was separated from his family. So it makes a heightened threat because their home is actually being invaded. It forces them to go further into the home and be more and more in danger until they get to the bathroom and they can't get out. And then it separates him from them, and his homeowner problems that he had before with the rotted wood that he needs to replace and the structural foundation of the house being suspect is what causes him to fall into the basement, which is almost like a spaceship in a horror movie. It's like flashing lights and there's electrical problems at this point and just debris, and that's that climactic moment that you mentioned. But for me, I also was like, why are the spiders doing this? Except that it's scary, and then they kind of threw us a definition of like, yeah, this is a weird spider behavior, like in the birds where they say birds shouldn't be doing this. It's just a way to acknowledge that something strange is happening, but it's got to happen because we're in this movie. But I did like how, looking back on it, there's not you can't really tell them that they could have done something other than what they chose to do because of the way they kept getting cut off. And I thought that that was an effective way, even though it was kind of silly watching him like fall through the house. It was all tying together. Like all the details from earlier were paying off to make sense why he would end up in the basement alone with the spider.
I completely agree with you there. That I mean, all of the things that they established, like you said, they do pay off um, in that basement scene with the spider. Since I mean, he literally falls through the floor from the second floor down through the rotten floor into the basement. Now, I did have some kind of questions about this last part of the movie, this big showdown, standoff, whatever you want to call it. Um, First, we've just established that these spiders are swarming, but once he falls into the basement, we don't see him anymore. It's just him and the queen. Or I'm sorry, first the general and then the queen. I keep forgetting that there's two, the male and the female. Uh, so yeah, it's like all of that swarming behavior just disappears. It's kind of like how the henchmen disappear just as the protagonist goes to fight the big bad guy. Yeah, I guess. um, I mean, yeah, the destruction does lead to some set pieces that end up getting used. The fuse box is kind of sparking and uh, giving off big pops of electricity, and that is ultimately where the general spider does end up. Um, the the behavior of the queen, though, maybe we can kind of like talk about this. I mean, she really is like hunting him like I felt like a an animal with a bit more sentience than a spider would have, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, spiders are not stupid per se, but I mean they're mostly instinctual from what I understand. They're not capable of forming plans and hiding and all these elaborate things that this spider seems to be doing. So it really does kind of it took me out of it a little bit, where he's kind of playing almost hide and seek with this spider that's trying to like sneak up on him and kill him. Like, did you feel the same way, or am I kind of out of line here?
I don't think you're out of line. I also noticed that there were spiders. They because I actually said out loud at the TV, like, "Where are the spiders that were covering him?" Another thing, and this is, I promise I will address the issues with the queen that you mentioned. But the other thing that bothered me about that too is this man has been covered in spiders since the bathroom. The family got out basically, but he had them dropping on his head and everything, and he's wiping them off. And it has been established in the movie that they are fast to kill. Like they want to kill. They're aggressive. So I don't think that was the thing that bothered me, because I'm like, you've established that all these like spiders dropping down on his head would just immediately snap and get him. And he's able to wipe all of them off. Even when he falls through the basement, a couple are still on him and he just kind of wipes them off. So I know that had to happen. But when I started thinking about that, that was a hole that bothered me. He did say when he was in the basement that Julian Sands' character told him the nest would have no other spiders. I guess because the drones would be on the outskirts protecting it. I assumed that was the explanation for why the henchman disappeared for the big boss character, but I agree with you. It was awkward. And I don't know if that comment was meant to explain it or not. And if you missed that comment, you'd be confused. I thought the end was effective as a horror movie, a horror comedy, but yes, the spider, it recreated his scene from when he was 2 and the spider crawled up his leg and all that sort of stuff. But the thing that really got me, besides the spider screaming, was when the spider was in the ventilation shaft running from him, and he is like going after it. He's not just letting it alone to hide. And when he holds up the flame and he's gonna, flame throw it, he then believes it's not there anymore and he puts it down and then she jumps on him. And that kind of got me because, like you said, it's like she knew when he was going to attack and when he wasn't. And I'm not sure that a spider could figure that out. I would assume the spider would either just stay in there until you went away, or if it decided it needed to protect itself, jump out. And so that part kind of bothered me a little bit, because she did seem to be stalking him like a different sort of animal and not necessarily like a spider, even if she was protecting the babies.
That was the exact moment that I was really thinking of was when she was in the ventilation and jumped down at him after he decided that she wasn't in there. And yeah, like how would a spider have that level of, I guess, situational awareness? I don't even know what you call it. Oh, I will go back just to jump back and address your concerns about Jeff Daniels being covered in spiders and not getting bitten. You forgot that he was wearing plot armor and that protects him. So that,
Oh yeah.
yes, he had a set of plot armor on, and that's why he didn't get bitten there. But
Poor
no, that
Margaret. I wish she had some plot armor.
well, and that's I thought the exact same thing because yes, he was quick to brush them off, but like you said, they've established multiple times that they are very quick to bite, and that any sort of bite is pretty much fatal within a matter of minutes. And the fact that he never gets bitten while brushing them off with his hands and covered in them, it it's a movie and he had plot armor and he couldn't die. He was the main character. That's really what it boils down to, I guess. I guess we should talk about, now that we're there though, we should probably talk about the death of the queen, because my goodness, what a death it was. Yeah, he just so happens to shoot her as she jumps at him with a nail gun. And if I remember right, there was flames involved too, but he shoots her directly through the nail gun into the pulsating egg sac that she had that was just starting to hatch of other babies that could possibly have other queens. Does that sound about right?
Yes, though I would add the even more cracktastic part, which is he catapults her into fire and she's on fire screaming, and then she still jumps out of the fire on fire herself to try to kill him, which was another thing I didn't quite believe. And yeah, then he nail guns her into the egg sac while she's burning.
That was how the yes, I had my brain just couldn't put all those pieces together, even though I just watched this yesterday,
I
because
understand. I do. Yeah.
that part just kind of defies logic. Yeah, he knocked her he knocked her off, like she was crawling up his leg, and she got onto a board that he used as kind of a catapult to launch her into the fire, and then she came back on fire, hissing and screaming. That's right. And then he shoots her with a nail gun into her egg sac. Um, man, I mean that's one way to end a movie. Full
I
stop.
mean, if
I
you,
don't know.
yeah.
I
If
don't know
you
what else to say. That is a way to end a movie.
if you've got a horror movie, you need it to be exciting at the end. So I guess you might as well set the whole thing on fire. That's all
I
there is
mean,
you can do.
I just at that point, because they did such a really good job of, they actually used real spiders for almost everything except for the very beginning. I think in South America, that was probably a fake spider, and then this queen at the end. But I mean, they did such a great job throughout the movie of actually using real living spiders that, just look like normal house spiders, because they probably were in this case, that for them to like backtrack and suddenly have this fake rubber spider again, like I just I don't know, it really did kind of take me out of the movie a bit, on top of the absurdity of the ending. Like it's I don't know, for it to have such an obviously fake spider, that kind of let me down a little bit at the end.
Yeah, I agree with you, but then also I just kind of expected it to have an over the top like ending, especially when he was isolated with them in the basement. So I don't know. Maybe I just kind of accepted it as like a popcorn flick kind of thing. But I totally see where you're coming from. That, especially like when the professor gets attacked in the barn, I feel like that was the first like over the top unrealistic death. And after that, the spiders became full on large monsters instead of here's these spiders. I can't tell whether they're a regular spider or not. And that's the danger because they can kill you very quickly. And I do feel like you're right that there is a switch between the oh this is a movie but it's kind of believable the fear that they're trying to put into me to oh now we just have like a creature feature type thing. Either at one point I think they used a big spider that they had to make bigger with prosthetics kind of thing, and then at other point they had an actual figure that they were using because they didn't want to hurt the large spider. So yeah, I do think you're right. I felt like there was almost like not like completely like it's two movies, but almost like everything from the previous movies destroyed, literally burned down as it goes full on huge monster. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it was the Jaws thing where when the spiders are little and kind of creepy and can pop out and kill you and go back, it's more effective than when they're huge. But I definitely see what you're saying. I just expected it to kind of go that way because I was like, this has to be the climax.
Well, Mel, I guess, I mean, you're right about the big horror finale showdown creature feature thing. I mean, but it does. I don't know. It's just so it's so disconnected from the rest of the movie. But alas, it is what it is. So that does just kind of take us to the very last little part of the movie, kind of the coda, if you will, and that's where we see that Jeff Daniels and his family have moved back to San Francisco. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, because for me, it's a mixed bag, because part of me wanted to see them staying in the small town because now he's kind of gotten acceptance. He's found, like, he was right all along, and he had identified what was the threat, and maybe the small town people would uh, accept him more, and trust in his judgment as a doctor more. But there is something that seems a little bit fitting about them going back to San Francisco, since they were originally from the big city. They did this move, um, well, for reasons we're not entirely sure of, like we said at the beginning of the episode. And it kind of does make sense to me would be like, well, F this, let's go back to the city. After all of this, let's just leave it all behind and go to a place where the spiders aren't insane like this. So I don't know. I mean, I would have liked to have seen an ending where they stay and are accepted, but it was a fitting end, in my opinion, that they just hightailed it right out and said, let's go back to San Francisco.
Yeah, I didn't even remember that ending from when I watched it as a kid, I guess because I was just so focused on being scared of spiders. I found it jarring too. I kind of just assumed that it was going to be like the happy, like sunshiny, small town Amblin Entertainment feel we already had, where he had gotten acceptance and he was starting his new life as their doctor and he was making the house what he wanted it to be. And I have to say, I was a little bit disappointed. I felt like I was getting to know them as characters, and then they all of a sudden made a decision that, yes, like you said, I could kind of understand, but also, I don't know. I think I would have preferred to end it with them getting acceptance and building a life for themselves where they were. But like you said, I also understand, like being like, no, I don't want to deal with this. But the end isn't completely benign because they experience earthquakes. I mean, I assume it's not the spiders coming back to get them. But yeah, they have to go check on the kids anyway. And I think that in some ways kind of shows that whether they live in the country or the city, there's going to be problems. And it just depends on which problems that they would rather put up with. And I guess since Jeff Daniels had arachnophobia, he would rather put up with some earthquakes and city problems and spiders. So, listeners, I feel like we've torn up arachnophobia pretty well. I'm not sure what else we can say. I do recommend checking out different articles, especially that mental floss piece about the 18 facts about arachnophobia. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there about how they use their spider actors that I thought was pretty interesting for a person who's kind of nervous about spiders. I kind of thought it was cute the way the spider actors were treated. I guess they tried very hard to be safe with these spiders. So for instance, when the one spider smushed, they did a lot to protect that actor from using, I guess you would say, like a dummy stunt double to other techniques. So if you've watched the movie, it may be kind of cool to see how they do some of those practical effects. Let me see here. We hope that if you've seen Arachnophobia before, you'll rewatch it, enjoy it. If you haven't, check it out. And I mean, even if you are a little creeped out by spiders, I still say check it out. The comedy aspects kind of outweigh the horror. So we're at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon or simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Right now, we are not doing new mini episodes on Patreon, but you have an entire kind of back catalog of mini episodes we've done before that you can listen to. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.